Hello and welcome back to Paranormal Perspectives, episode 9. My name is Kieran Mace, and as my friends call me, Stan. Tonight we're going to talk about trauma demons. Sounds a bit strange, it sounds a bit crazy, maybe something you would hear from a comic book, but truly it's something quite personal to me. And today I'd actually like to share a story and open up questions as to what the explanation could be. It could be psychological, or it could be something we would describe as paranormal. Um, so, looking into my family's past, my granddad came from Poland, and leaving Poland back in the 40s at the end of the Second World War, truthfully, he was a prisoner of war in Treblinka by the Nazis back in the day. So that's quite an opening. So, as you'd imagine, without me going into detail, the things that he saw and experienced there stayed with him for many years. And there are things that can truly break a person and stay with a person all their life. Thankfully, at the end of the war, he was offered an opportunity to move to the UK, and amazingly, he met my wonderful grandmother there and lived a wonderful life. But for the rest of his life living in the UK, he suffered from what we would now describe as PTSD, where he would wake up in the night screaming ultimately, and he refused to tell everybody what it was that he was reliving, but they knew he was suffering terribly. And that affected his mental health, of course, and his physical health eventually, and something that stays with you. And it tends to be a running theme in my family. And even though what he had been through was far worse than I've experienced, and I'm still very grateful for the life that I have here today, there are things that tend to stay with people. And my direct experiences have led me to question what are these things really? And I think in this instance, it most likely would have been a psychological impact. But there seems to be something that has passed through the family in some way or form. I personally I mentioned previously on an earlier episode about my personal experience and what opened me up into this so-called paranormal world. Um, at the age of 5, was hit by a car, had quite a serious encounter with a motor vehicle, would be the best way to describe it, and I was in quite a bad way without going into too much detail. And of course, naturally, being rushed to the hospital, it was an emergency. They did everything that they could to keep me in my best state and ultimately keep me alive. And during my many major operations to fix various bones, sinew, all sorts of things, I experienced, of course, the most immense pain, the most horrible things. And I remember eventually I had an experience where I was walking around the hospital. Previously, my legs had been broken. I was in a severely bad way. Yet suddenly, I was stood in the hallway and I couldn't figure out what just happened. Like, how can I be standing? Why am I here? What am I doing here? Like, where do I go? I was looking around for my mum at that time, and as I've mentioned before in my previous episodes, I walked the hospital essentially, trying to make contact with the various patients there as they couldn't see me. And I walked further and further, and this is where I encountered this, what I call a trauma demon, for the first time. And at the end of this hallway corridor, I entered this room full of holes. It had a coat hook with the doctor's dressings and various different things left aside, and a discarded broom. It was, yeah, kind of like a side room of sorts. But I remember walking into this room where it felt like time stopped. And I encountered something in this room. It was black, black as pitch, black as anything that I've ever seen in this life, because eventually the room darkened, it kind of drew me in. And I saw the room distort, and this thing, it had no physical body, but I could see it. It's the best way I could describe it. It's a bizarre thing to say, I know, but I knew it, and it knew me. And as I came into contact with this thing, time seemed to completely stop, and I was transported all over the place. I was transported 10 miles down the road into other places and times, and it was quite a major download. This thing seemed to almost not care about me at all, basically, didn't really think much of me. It was just something I knew that was ancient, old, and I don't know, just scary. I hate even talking about it now. But I kind of speak about this story because I think it happens to more people than people would like to admit to. And you should never discount the explanation that could be simply a psychological issue. But some of these things simply aren't. And my story will make you maybe think that there could be something more. than meets the eye when it comes to these situations. So yeah, this being that I encountered, after this download, I then was transported back to my body, and I woke up after having a dream, which I thought was then at that point real. As I woke up from this so-called dream, I was in casts and bandages. I couldn't move. I physically couldn't have walked in any way, shape, or form. But as the weeks went by, I had other operations, other fixings, other different things. Eventually, I was in a better state where I was in a lot less pain, and I could be moved out of my bed. And this very lovely nurse very kindly took me out of the bed and put me into this wheelchair. And she wheeled me about, as he would do. And I was just happy just to get moving to see a different site. And as I began to explore the hospital, I realized I knew this place. This is the place I'd been without my body. So I led her in a certain direction. I kept pointing to tell her when to turn left and to turn right, to follow these different corridors. Eventually, I encountered the room that I met this demon. And I couldn't definitely say it was a demon now. And I freaked out, like, because reality didn't quite match a measure. And I was only 5 years old at the time, though, but I knew enough to know what was real and what was not in that regards. And obviously, the nurse couldn't figure out what was going on. She thought, "Why is this kid going crazy, though?" Because I've just taken him out of the bed. He seemed to really be really happy a few months ago. And yeah, I went into myself for a few weeks after that point. I was very reserved. I didn't talk to anybody. I just let the doctors do whatever they needed to do to me to keep me kind of feeling better. Then eventually, towards the end of my time in hospital, when I was close to being discharged, for a good few nights, this thing visited me. And I still have this image in my head of this black creature. And it would appear in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, and I could see to the right of me where all the nurses were at the nurses' station. It was obviously very dark, though, but other areas were sort of dimly lit so they could continue working. And the other kids were asleep. And this thing would come to the end of my bed, and I have this very vivid memory of this creature. Its hands kind of casting themselves over the end of the bed, and this head very slowly bobbing up with two bright eyes. And not so bright it was glowing, though, but white enough so you could almost just about see the pupils. And it used to leave me so scared that I would hide under my bed, and I wouldn't talk for days after. It didn't happen, like I say, every single night, though. It happened quite a few times before I left. And you could say that's just simply the mind trying to understand this traumatic thing that's happened. It could be an entirely psychological thing. And I get that. And also saying that, nobody else saw this thing but me. And at the time, no one knew this was happening to me. It would only be like a few years after that I eventually started to talk about it. But anyway, I left the hospital, was physically better. I had to walk about with crutches and a wheelchair. I was late going back to school as well because I physically couldn't fit into the school because it wasn't quite a wheelchair based at the time. So I had to wait a little while to be able to get to my first classes, though. But they did their best to teach me at home. So yeah, they're a lovely school. And when I went back, I kept having all of these night terrors. And these night terrors, of course, would happen at the night during the night and also be terrible. So no surprise. I'd have quite a few of these almost every night for weeks and weeks and weeks after that, where I'd wake up in bed and I'd always talk about the man in my room. Just, the man's here. I don't want the man. And I couldn't quite explain to my mum at the time what it was I was seeing. I could just describe it as the man or it's the thing or whatever it might be. And again, it was this very dark creature. It was in my room and it was just sat there watching. And I recognized the feeling of it because it felt the same as this kind of almost infinite being or whatever it would be that I met at the hospital. And as you can imagine, for a kid, that's quite disturbing. It's quite frightening because how can a poor kid even begin to comprehend and elaborate this explanation as to what they're seeing, even begin to understand it? And I just thought, yeah, there was a thing in my room, I didn't like it. And as time went by, I suffered depression. To have depression at a very young age as well is a very unusual thing, and but also relatively common for kids who suffer quite traumatic things. And so yeah, time went on. I kept having kind of panic attacks. I go through bouts of like, quite extreme depression, really, where I just couldn't be bothered to do anything. And but yeah, during this time, I discovered art was my kind of outlet, and part of the good thing that kind of came from this thing that I met after I came into contact with this being, it gave me this ability to draw and to think differently. And as a young kid, I was quite advanced in my artistic ability, and at least the teacher could see, okay, that's a way to help this little kid out. Would give him a pen and paper when he was feeling a bit panicky, and it helped to kind of almost bloodlet the pain of this thing that it was processing. So that was kind of partly my way through as well, and I'd love to kind of do like an art healing thing in the future as well, kind of coming from this experience though, but that's something for another day. And yeah, as time went by, I began to push back this memory. Yet I thought I had left this thing behind, but it kept appearing in different ways, and this is where it kind of gets weirder and weirder. As a kid, people used to really hate me. I was the sweetest, happiest little kid. Yeah, obviously suffering from depression though, but I was kind of happy in terms of like just playing, wanting to play with my friends, trying to do normal things. I was very kind of polite, and I was a very kind of relatively good kid. Obviously not perfect, but people used to just explode at me all the time. I would have a babysitter who looked after me whilst my mum was out working, because at that time she was a single mum. So she, yeah, very kindly offered to look after me for a few hours, and the babysitter would often just freak out and start screaming at me when it could be the littlest thing. It could be just simply, okay, well, okay, Kieran, can you just sit in the living room for a couple of hours and play with your toys and all that? And yeah, that's fine. And all I did was just walk up to her living room window to look out the her garden door window. And she had a lovely garden full of lovely flowers. I was just looking at them quite happily, and this lady just came to the room and went absolutely mental. I was screaming, shouting, punching the walls, doing everything, and then she stopped, shaking which was very unlike her. She was a very kind of calm, relaxed person. And now I went home thinking I did something horrible and all that, and eventually I told my mum about it, and yeah, she wasn't too pleased. Had a certain chat with her friend. So I'd like to just take a moment to let you guys know that I've launched a book, my first book. Over the last few episodes of the Paranormal Perspectives podcast, I've had such fortune to meet some amazing people, and as ever, it's a reminder that the most amazing things happen to the most normal people. And the more we talk about these things, the more we can learn from each other, the more that we can expand our understanding of the universe. So this book essentially is a selection of ghost stories. These are experiences that I've experienced firsthand. Some theories around them, maybe a bit of humour in there too. But the book isn't just simply about scaring people. It's really about opening people's minds, essentially, that, again, like I say, the most amazing things happen to the most normal people. So I hope you don't mind taking a look if you have the time, and let me know what you think. I'll post a link in the comments. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the episode. But I kept finding people just randomly explode, like with the anger out of nowhere. And yeah, kids can be annoying sometimes. Anybody can be annoying. But it's just that the rapid escalation was just bizarre. I'm going to school. I had a maths teacher that absolutely hated me. He seemed to. I was just a kid just trying to learn maths. I mean, I didn't like maths, but I was willing to give it a go. He came in just talking to me about a certain homework assignment he was trying to explain to me. The knowledge was asking him a question. Okay, well, how does this work? Like, I don't understand how to work out this equation. He would explode, start shouting. For him, he'd start punching the tables, kicking the tables, throwing his pens around the room, and then he'd stop and then think, "Why did I just do that?" and then walk away. I don't think he was a bad person either. Like, he was a bit of a grumpy, grumpy, stereotypical maths teacher with a big messy beard, as I tend to always have at the time. But again, I thought, well, I must be a bad kid or something. Maybe this just happens because I did something wrong. And I was extra kind of conscious of everything that I did then, despite all the other things I was dealing with as a result of the accident. And yeah, years went by where just things just kept happening more and more, and eventually I'd make my way into my sort of late childhood, and then into my kind of early teens. I used to work at a popular frozen food store. And that was a prime place for the angry people to suddenly start exploding. I'd have customers come to me to kind of talk to me about a certain thing, like I'm looking for some cheese. Where's the cheese? Oh, down the cheese aisle, obviously. And they'll go to the cheese aisle, come back. Oh, the cheese isn't there, and they'll get massively irate, ridiculously quickly. Again, start stomping and shouting and screaming. I've had customers after I've picked up the bread that they put on the floor, for some reason decide to run at me, stomping, shouting, screaming, and threaten to kind of physically attack me. Obviously, I'm a non-violent person. I refuse to approach anybody for any situation, regardless of how frustrating things can get. So I just stood there with this complete stranger screaming in my face because I picked up his bread off the floor. And at that age, I began to think something's not right here. Like, this doesn't happen to my friends. I spoke to my friends at the time. Well, does this happen to you, or am I just really annoying? And well, we wouldn't be your friend, Kieran, if you're that irritating. So I began to question then, like, something's not quite right. And as this anger escalated more and more, I kind of began to think, I kind of don't want to work these extra jobs to pay for my college and my education. It's too much of a risk, really. Like, people just won't seem to leave me alone. It began to come back to the house. And me and my sister and my mum were living there at the time with our stepdad. And yeah, we experienced strange happenings around the house. Disembodied voices would appear usually around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, where we experienced it sounded like a very jovial crowd laughing, cheering. You could hear the clinks of glass as if people were drinking. Initially, I thought it was because there was a party next door. But it kept happening every night, and I would open the window to think, okay, well, is it coming from outside? And eventually I realized actually it was coming from inside my room. It wasn't so loud that, it could be, immediately audible. But once the TV was off, everything was quiet, I could hear loud enough, just about as loud as I'm speaking now, actually. Actually, no, maybe a bit quieter than that, but enough to be very much audible. It was coming right from the center of my room. And as the nights went by, it would happen again and again and again. I'd just listen to it. I think something's not right here. This isn't normal. This, it shouldn't be happening. And yeah, my mum, bless her, like, he already had spent many years looking after me after this accident. I thought, I just don't want to tell her this at the moment because it's the last thing she needs. She has enough to deal with. My sister would hear it too. She would hear the parties in the night, and it would come from her room some nights. It would sort of move between the brother and the sister. We would then get whistling at night. It'd be very loud whistling as well, much louder than the conversation. This so-called spiritual party. We had heard whistling around the house. It would be immediately in front of our faces sometimes. It would be down the corridor. Sometimes it would be outside the house in the garden. And we initially would dismiss it as, okay, maybe a whistle could be carried in the wind. It could be one of our neighbours just whistling on their way to, out of their garden or something on the way to work. But it kept happening over and over again to the point where our friends that came over could hear it themselves. And eventually we were just known as the whistling house, really. Like, we couldn't explain it. We'd have friends in our living room just having a conversation, and suddenly there'd be this really loud whistle right in front of one of our friends that we'd all kind of jump back at. And they didn't seem to feel scared then, but we kind of went back in the evenings and thought, okay, is this going to kind of lead to something? And eventually it did. Things began to kind of materialize in a much bigger way. One particular evening, I was sat in front of the TV with a table in front of me. It's like a tea table. It was close enough for me I could have accidentally have kicked it, and that's one thing to consider. But sat in front of me was a large metal bowl, very thick, very heavy, and it was full of like these little jelly beans. Believe it or not, we were quite a healthy family, but obviously not that day. And I was just watching the TV, minding my own business, and suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard the most almighty bang from the middle of the table. And as I looked down towards the bang, I could see that the bowl had jumped up mid-air and was just about ready to land. And at that time, the little jelly beans shot across the room in all sorts of different places, like an explosion of sorts. Obviously, I was quite shocked. I'd never seen anything physically be affected like that. And after that, like, there was this horrible feeling of just this awfulness. And during that time when we were experiencing things back at the house, school was getting more intense. Like, the bullying got way, way worse. And eventually my sister joined the school. as though she's a few years younger than me, and the bullying was kind of focused on her too. And again, we were just drawn, people were drawn to us constantly. Like the kids would just not leave us alone. Like there wasn't anything particularly obvious about us to make fun of, other than the fact that we just didn't react to them. So they obviously saw that as a challenge to keep on pushing more. So yeah, we'd get pushed around, insulted, just the standard school BS really, as that which is supposedly part of the school experience, as the teachers at the time said. But either way, like yeah, we weren't that far different to most kids, but things were just getting stranger and stranger, and it was just kept coming back to the house. Um, Things progressed where people in the house were being affected to the point where I came back one evening after a really bad day at school. I just wanted to just go and rest my head, really. I thought, okay, I just want to forget about the day, throw my school bag down and chill for a bit. And I walked up to my bedroom and had this strange gut feeling like gravity had dropped, as if I was being pulled down by something. It's almost the feeling you get when you stood too close to an edge, where your gut is telling you, okay, don't do it, you're going to drop, there's danger. But I thought, well, this is my room. So I touched the handle and opened the door, and I saw the room was dark. It was daytime, but the room was dark. And as I looked, it was like the room was distorted. It's like reality was bending my table and the walls into a point where, in a certain corner, I could see that there was almost like a vortex of sorts. That's the best way I could describe it, though, like a spiral. And that scared the life out of me naturally. Anybody would react that way. I absolutely cacked myself. That would be the best way to describe it. And I just ran. I just ran as far as I could out of the house, and even like partway down the street just to escape this horrible situation. And I thought, things aren't right here. Things are building up, building up, building up. And yeah, it even got to a point where I think this is the pinnacle of the whole journey, really, where my stepdad, yeah, my mum was going through a divorce with my stepdad at the time. Tempers were quite frayed, and I was kind of like the mediator to try and keep things calm. And I did kind of question, okay, well, whatever was there in the house, did it affect that person as well, or was that person going to be that way regardless? Obviously, a divorce is a very hard thing to go to, understandably. But after a few evenings of him physically pushing my mum and her not really doing much about it, eventually I heard them having quite a major argument. And I walked downstairs to kind of ask them, "Hey, you okay? Is everything all right?" And without me doing anything, I barely, reached the bottom of the stairway. My stepdad marched through and grabbed me by the throat and threw me into the cupboard. Yeah, quite a force where I could feel yeah the wood of the cupboard kind of dig its way into my ribs and all sorts. I couldn't breathe as I just hung there, and I refused to do anything. I refused to fight. I absolutely refused to. So eventually, like, I looked into his eyes basically when this was happening, and it was the same as the angry customer at the shop I used to work in. It was the same as my maths teacher. It was the same look at others that I've experienced that have exploded. Like nobody was there. I could see. It was almost like looking like a dead person. Basically, it's a horrible feeling. And as I saw like light come back to his eyes, he dropped me to the floor for a second and then tried to shake my hand to say sorry. I refused to. I just said, "You just better get back into the kitchen now before anything silly happens." But anyway, he was dealt with by the police, let's just say. And eventually there was a happy ending where we were able to escape from that horrible situation. But that wasn't right. There wasn't a build up as in like that person hadn't done that to me before. He'd been a bit that way with my mother, but for me never having an argument with him, never barely saying a word to him. Yeah, and you could argue as to whether, like, obviously he could have been jealous of me being that person's son and so on, getting attention, blah blah blah. But something wasn't quite right about the whole interaction. It didn't feel quite almost human in a way, and it's something I kind of wanted to ignore. I have kind of ignored for many years since, because it sounds too ridiculous. I'm quite a rational person. I like to come up with an explanation of everything really, or try to at least search for it. But that I can simply say it wasn't human. It wasn't my stepdad, and even though he wasn't a great guy at all, that wasn't him. And things had reached its pinnacle then. We had enough of these strange goings on around the house and these strange explosions. And that's where I came into contact with one of my now very good friends and mentors, and a medium that I met many years ago. And back then, I was part of a religion that I wasn't particularly aligned with. I'd continued to kind of go to church, to Sunday school, and all that, thinking that this thing might chase away whatever's around me or whatever's been following me since the hospital. This lovely lady, like she met me for the first time, and she knew straight away. Hang on a minute, there's something not right here. And obviously at the time she didn't know me very well. Like she was a friend of my mum's. She was just coming by for a visit, say hi. So she had to very carefully break it to me, like, okay, something's not right here. I need to act like almost like it was an emergency of sorts. So she had a good chat with my mum and say, look, okay, I want to tell you something. Like you may have not told me about this yet. And then she explained the whole situation, like what she was picking up to my mum. And my mum hadn't told many people about what was happening, about things we'd experienced, and some of it we weren't telling her as well, to be fair. But hearing to me at the time, he was essentially a stranger, really. Like say to my mum all these things. How on earth would she have known these things? And some things she was saying to my mum at the time were things I haven't told her yet. So how did she know? Where did she get that from? I wasn't exactly walking about with a big T-shirt saying "There's some demon following me around. Please help." Because at the time I was still debating it as well. I was thinking, okay, I just don't want to believe it's true, but having to kind of, it's almost just like denial, thinking denial is the best protector. But yeah, in the end, she kind of went to my room and like had a look, and like she was absolutely disgusted by something. I remember the look on her face. It's like she walked into like, I don't know. I sort of say like a slaughterhouse would be the best way to describe it. Anyway, it's something of absolute disgust, of like the horror, and not particularly great. I mean, yeah, my room was a bit messy, but I don't think it was the mess that was causing the fear, really. But she kind of sat me down and said, "Look, okay, you may not know what this is, or you may not understand this fully just yet, but I need to tell you something." And she went to explain to me the things that she was picking up. And again, she was saying things to me that I hadn't told her, let alone my mum. And there's those things she was telling me about the things I'd been experiencing, about the noises, about the anger, the business, and all sorts of different things that were floating around. And to the point where, like, this thing that was hanging around me, like, it at times was making me feel so depressed that I almost didn't want to be here anymore, quite frankly. It made me not want to speak to friends, not trust people. I just shut myself away and just keep on drawing and listening to my music. I didn't want to be around people, because the more I was around people, the more I could have encountered this thing. It was quite a horrible time, really. And I mean, it's like the ultimate teenage angst. Most teenagers will go out to go drinking. So most teachers will go out to, their girlfriends' houses, or do all sorts of kind of crazy things, go to gigs and clubs and all that, and just have all the crazy life. No, but for me, I ended up kind of ultimately accidentally opening up a vortex in my room via this horrible thing that had followed me around for years. And yeah, she explained to me, okay, like we need to do something about this now, because enough's enough. Like you've dealt with this for too long. It's time to kind of end this. And I thought, okay, well, this kind of sounds like a movie now. Is this real, or should I trust this person? My gut just told me, yeah. I mean, what do you have to lose? At the end of the day, like if she's making this up, then nothing's going to happen, isn't it? And this whole situation won't change. So she did her thing, and she stood around, I believe, in the corner of my room. It happened in this particular corner, like this thing would focus in this area. And it's amazing, she identified straight away exactly where I saw the spiral, where the vortex was forming when the room went dark previously. And she stood there and had this conversation with complete thin air, like, asking what it was, what it's doing. And she said, okay, just leave me to it, Kieran, like just walk out way for a bit, maybe go out for a walk. That's what I did. I just walked up and down the road. I went to the park near our house, actually. And this is where my mum told me what happened. Like she was there, and she was almost having a fight with this, seemingly again thin air. My mum said like she saw it. She saw what I could see, the thing that I first saw at the end of my hospital bed all these years ago, and at the end of that corridor. She said this thing was insulting her, hissing at her, just trying to sort of do all sorts of things, like to sort of throw objects at her. it was something that was darting between boxes in my room, things that were just, you know, just things I wouldn't today. I think it's ridiculous though, but I've seen this thing, and yeah, from this thing, like my friend that was helping us, she described what she could see, and it was exactly the thing that I saw, and that's to me what hit home. Okay, this thing, that around me, like I'm not a bad kid, I'm not an unlucky kid, I'm not annoying. This thing just wouldn't leave me alone. It had been with me for quite some time. So yeah, she had one almighty fight with it, and yeah, it exhausted her. But eventually, she was able to force it to leave. At least that's what she said that night. And eventually, I came back home and said, is everything okay? And she said, oh yeah, yeah, it's fine. Just go back to your room. It'll be okay. And she gave me something to put in the corner, some crystals, and I thought, yeah, crystals, it's ridiculous. That's not going to work, is it? Though, babe? I thought, okay, I'll just be polite and give it a try. Again, what do you have to lose? Weirdly, the next morning, I woke up and I wasn't depressed anymore. I didn't feel anxious or angry or bitter. It was the first time in many, many, many years that I felt completely clean, and it was the strangest thing. And yeah, I still have anxiety even to today, but not to the point where it is so crippling that I cannot do anything or speak to anyone. It was just the strangest thing. So yeah, like thanks to this friend, I can't explain how it worked, but it did. And these things stay with you. And in a way, I'm kind of glad that I had this experience though, because it has given me the gift of this ability for art and other abilities, let's just say. But there are these things that do prey on the weak during their time of need. And this thing obviously was attracting to me for reasons I don't know exactly. It could just be that, I now know that I'm a medium anyway. It could be that, just like the film Insidious, really, like there are those that walk about in the dark, there are some of those who act as a light, and unfortunately like a beacon for these things to attach to. But sometimes, yeah, there does happen. Things do follow you back, and again, never discount the possibility of it being a psychological issue as well, and that's something always worth speaking to your doctor about. But some people do face these things alone that they're told don't exist or can't, and I've literally seen these things, and it's horrifying. So again, just like the way it affected my granddad and his experience, like I begin to question now, like, did he bring something back with him as well? Did he have something that he was fighting and ultimately kind of succumbed to, really? And yeah, and again, it kind of makes me think of that film It Follows, the film that's about this supernatural creature that gradually finds you over time, and it's attracted you through to you for a means I won't mention here anyway. But ultimately, it's kind of something there. It's kind of attracted through trauma or through different things. Yeah, but not everything has explanation. Most things aren't that. Most things are just, like I say, just trauma. Some things, some things can include kind of bad entities though, but sometimes they're kind of harmless. They're just simply like as traumatized as you are and kind of follow you along. But yeah, I go back to that hospital sometimes now and I think, how on earth did that happen? Like, for one thing, how did I survive that? Like, I should have died, and I should have walked out of that hospital, I suppose, or not walked out of the hospital with various physical disabilities or mental disabilities. I walked out completely okay, and that's thanks to the doctors. We can never discount how amazing they are and the amazing work that they do. But yeah, so that's kind of my story really. So there are things out there that are not welcome, and you kind of need to almost fight them. And there are things that attach to you through your weakness and prey upon it. Why they want to gather energy that way, I don't know. But there are some things that I believe that have never been human. They're just there doing their things, and they're awful things. And even talking about them as well, it gives them energy. Like even like talking about it now, it will give it energy. But thankfully, that's kind of ultimately long gone now. But I kind of look back and think like, yeah, that's the time when I began to realize that my previous religious institution that defined the world for me within this scripture and these teachings, it didn't align with reality of what I literally was experiencing and what they were literally telling me couldn't exist. There's a massive paradox, I suppose, where one was overriding the other, and that's where eventually I left my religion and sought the answers really. So I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to be controlled by these things, and make my own way, and I have these abilities now, and I want to kind of refine them over time and use them for good, and I've done a lot of good things with them over the years. And yeah, so trauma, it's worth speaking about. It's very hard to speak about it from the psychological aspect, speak to a professional, speak to a friend. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes there's more to it than meets the eye. Not meaning to scare anyone, but yeah, it's an awful thing. And there'll be a part two to this as well, where I speak to my friend Christine, because I know she's experienced other things and other entities too. And mediums are pretty good at identifying these things. Some of them can see them, some of them can sense them, but most of them have the ability to force these things out. And I don't know, like I say, exactly what they are, but they're just not welcome, and you do have power over them. So, but yeah, this is something I talk about in my book, Paranormality. And this is kind of like, a little snippet of the startings of this book, which kind of took me on this amazing adventure of, discovery of knowledge, of power, and all sorts. And yeah, thanks for listening, and watch out for part two. Good night.